Welcome back for part two of the Irish Medtech Skillnet Lunch and Learn series with Brian Pennie and David Gillick. My name is Yvonne O'Byrne and I work for the Irish Medtech Skillnet in a business development and project manager role. I know many of you on the call today are very familiar and have previously engaged with the Irish Medtech Skillnet, but there are a few new faces. And for those of you who don't know what we do, the Irish Medtech Skillnet are one of 70 Skillnet business networks that are funded by Skillnet Ireland through the National Training Fund. Now, we support the Irish medtech sector here in Ireland in three different ways. The first and I suppose most commonly known way is that we provide subsidised training to companies and individuals working within the sector. The second is that we work really closely with our industry partners to co-create bespoke training programs to meet sector-specific skills needs. And lastly, we regularly publish research articles and reports that provide key industry insights across a broad range of topics that are relevant to the sector here in Ireland. So as I said, welcome back. This is the second of a two-part series. We did kick this series off at the end of last year. Back in December, both Brian and David joined us and they shared their extensive experience, insights, and gave us some practical tools for undertaking a thoughtful evaluation and reflection of 2024 and aligning your goals, whether those be personal or professional, to your values, which I found really impactful when I was doing my own review for 2024. Now, if you missed part one of this series, not to worry, I have put the link to part one, which is available on our YouTube channel, into the chat box, and you can rewatch that at your own time. Today's session is going to pick up where we left off, and we'll continue that conversation, shifting the lens forward to 2025 to discuss four main topics. Those being building sustainable habits, motivation, which goes hand in hand with accountability, and overcoming setbacks. And before I hand you over now to our two speakers, I will just introduce you to both Brian and David. First up, we have Brian Pennie. Brian is a renowned author, neuroscientist, and transformation expert. And we also are joined today by David Gillick, who is an Olympian, broadcaster, and motivational speaker. So I'm going to pass you over now. So I'll pass it over to you, Brian, and you can kick us off.
Recognize what my experience is. If you just say in your own mind, "Oh, I'm going to do that," like a New Year's resolution, I'm going to go to the gym this year, or I'm going to eat healthy this year. If you just say that once or twice, the chances of that actually happening and committing to something is not very good, to be quite honest. And this is where accountability really kicks in. It's about commitment and taking personal responsibility for that change. And this taps back into what we were talking about before Christmas, reviewing what you've done and setting a plan. And if you do that on paper or you do that on a computer sheet, whatever way that is for you, it's not in your head anymore. You've brought it into reality, you've made it concrete, and you can hold yourself accountable. Now, a really great way of doing this as well is by setting up some kind of accountability checklist as well. So, what I would say with that is, and we'll touch on this when it comes to habits as well, it's like tracking your habits. And there's lots of different habit trackers out there as well. But basically putting it down on the page saying, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Maybe you use your Google Calendar, that's holding you accountable, and tick it off the list. And that's just a way of holding yourself personally accountable for what you do. But I think the important element of this is don't have it in your head, put it on a page, put it on a computer for something you're going to review and check, because that's the element that will keep you accountable. And one other thing, before I hand it over to David as well, something that I found quite interesting as well, is just tell other people about it. Like if you say in your head you're going to go to the gym or you're going to eat healthy, and I'm just using those examples, or you're going to create boundaries this year and say no, so you're going to get pulled into situations and be very time poor. Well, if you go and tell people about that, you're going to feel more obliged to hold yourself accountable because you're putting it out there into the world. So a key point here is some people might be afraid of that. Maybe the individual accountability doesn't work. So use what works for you. That's absolutely critical. And I'm going to hand it over to David now for his thoughts, and then especially in terms of getting other people to hold you accountable.
Yeah, cheers, Brian. I'm kind of nodding away here and almost smiling to myself because when you mentioned there towards the end there about, even saying it to somebody else, there is that fear factor. There's a fear of failure. The minute you say it to someone, there's almost like, oh, but what if I don't? And what if it doesn't happen? I've been very lucky in, I suppose, coming through the world of sport where I've always had a coach, even from a young age. From the age of 7, 8, when I joined my local athletics club, I had somebody there that was kind of, telling me what to do, challenging me in certain ways, pushing me into races, things like that. And you grow from that. And, over the course of my career, when we talk about accountability, yes, there's an onus on yourself to take ownership of your talent or, what you want to achieve. But there's also having that supportive network, that someone is there that you can talk to, you can confide in, you can be open and honest. You can almost kind of review your year with that person. And I think sport is a very easy way to do that because you always have that person there. So you would debrief on a regular basis. You would debrief at the end of an athletic year. But I'll be honest, that was all well and good in terms of my own kind of athletic career. There was a time when, I used to write down the goal for the year. So let's say my event was 400 meters. As I was progressing, the times went from 47 seconds to 46 seconds. And my New Year's resolution was always, okay, all geared around sport. I want to run 46, whatever it was. And I used to write it down on a piece of paper and I'd stick it on my bedroom wall. And that was it. My goal setting was done for the year. It's up there. It's going to happen. It wasn't going to happen. Why? And Brian touched on it. I had no plan. There was no system. There was no structure. There was no routine. There was no strategy. It was literally just, I wanted that result. I wanted the outcome. And it took me an awful long time to actually realize, and I came across a great quote, a goal without a plan is just a wish. And I think sometimes we wish and we hope and we dream that we're going to do something, be it that promotion, be it more money, be it, I'm going to run a 5K or go to the gym, whatever it might be. But how many people are actually taking ownership and putting a bit of a structure, a bit of a plan in place? And as Brian kind of touched on there, it all starts by simply writing it down and actually going, okay, well, what can I do? What is the process? In 2007, I won my second European title, which is fantastic. And it gave me a lot of belief to go forward and get better and get to a global level. So what I did was, it was the first time I ever sat down with a pen and paper and I actually created a plan. And I want you just to think of a pyramid, and I broke down that pyramid into big blocks. The very top of that pyramid was 44.8 seconds. Why? Because if I wanted to make a global 400-meter final, on average, I needed to run 44.8 seconds. So then I had clarity about what I needed to do. Okay, that was the end result. That was the outcome. And then it broke it down. All those little blocks became the process. Well, what are the practical things that I can do on a day-to-day basis? And I began focusing on the process. Okay. The very bottom of that pyramid was people, because I soon realized, and we spoke about this in our last webinar, yes, I was good in certain areas. I was dedicated. I applied myself to my sport. I turned up on time. I did all of those things right. But I needed people who were skilled and had the knowledge in different areas. And I went to these people and I said, you know what? I want to run 44.8 seconds. Here's how I'm going to do it, but I need your help. Straight away, there's accountability. They can see that, okay, he's putting a plan in place. They could see where they would fit into that overall sort of plan, and we'd work together. And that, in my mind, came back to that accountability piece. I put it down on a piece of paper. I was committed to it. I had people around me. Suddenly I had that network. And I think that's one of the things when I moved away from sport that I struggled with. And it used to come to the end of the year and we're talking about goals for the upcoming year. I struggled with that. And what I realized was I needed people. And there was no shame in that. Yeah, I was good in certain areas by myself, but I needed that coach element. I needed that person who could support me, that person that could challenge me, that person that could say, "Jesus, David, did you ever think of doing this? You'd be good at that." And even those other eyes that would spot little things. And for me, that's now where I'm at. I'm going back full circle and having these people around me. And even in a further kind of sporting context, I hated running. I moved away from the sport. I hated it. I resented it because it put me in a situation where I wasn't happy. I was lost. I didn't know exactly my purpose and my role in the world. For years, my identity was so closely linked to athletics, and then suddenly it's all over. And I got back into running through the local park run, going up and just running and, faced like a tomato and getting beaten by everybody, but I did it. I toed the line. And after a while, I said, I need a goal. I need something that's going to motivate me, something that's going to be that long-term goal that I can work towards. So I decided to do the Dublin Marathon in 2022. Okay, now if you're unfamiliar with my background, as some might be, I used to run 400 meters. Okay, a marathon is 42K. Okay, it's like a world apart. It's a different sport. It's the other end of the spectrum. And as Brian was talking about accountability, I started saying that I was going to run my first marathon in under 3 hours. Okay, and if anyone's on the call who's an avid runner, running a marathon in sub three it's really hard. In your first marathon, it's almost bonkers, like it's crazy. But I threw it out there, and it was probably one of the first times that, you know what, I don't care what other people think. This is something that I want to do for myself. I'm going to throw it out there. It's a stretch goal, but you know what? If I don't make it and I land at 3:10, who cares? You know, I'm doing it for me. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't break 3 hours in my first marathon, but I ended up running 3:16, and it was horrible and it was horrendous and it hurt like hell. But I got halfway, just past halfway at the Walkerstown roundabout, and a fella came up beside me, and he said, "Ah, Gillick." He said, "Oh, the 3 hours doesn't look like it's on today," and he just sauntered off up the road, and I was literally felt like I was running in honey. But you know what? I don't care, and I don't hold it against that person, because I grew an awful lot by just throwing it out there, just saying to people, this is what I want to do, and not having the fear of failure or the fear of what other people might think. Jesus, you hear your man's going for this. Who cares? And I think sometimes that's what holds us back. It's just having that sort of doubts in our minds that we can't do this, or, you know, I'm not good enough for that, or, you know, I'm not intelligent enough, or I'm not, I don't have the expertise. And we tell ourselves that we can't do something. I think that sometimes is the anchor that holds us back. And I think if you allow yourself to get a pen and paper, sit down, and just let the mind wander. We always talk to kids and we say, what do you want to be when you grow up? Yeah, what you want to do. But as adults, do we actually say that to ourselves? What are the little things? And it doesn't have to be the big, hairy, audacious goal. And I think sometimes when we start New Year, we're on social media and we see New Year's resolutions, and we see people putting up the great things about what they're going to do in the year. And that can be quite off-putting, and it can be quite kind of heavy for a lot of people. But come back to yourself. What are the simple things that you would love to do for you and the people around you? And I think if we start by just writing them down, jotting them down, and as Brian said, and he mentioned really, really practical, great point, you know, if it's kind of, whether it's in your professional life, your personal life, you know, who are the people that are going to help you? So maybe it's time to maybe knock on a door and create time with that person that might be able to help you in a professional world. Or maybe it's going back and going, okay, you know what, I want to run a 5K, or I want to go to the gym, whatever it might be. Put it in your diary. If it's not in the diary, it's not going to happen. And make sure there's a value on it. Because if we don't put a value or a priority on it, that will be the first thing that gets kicked out when something else comes knocking. And I think you just got to put boundaries around it, build it into your day-to-day life, your weekly life, and have people around you that can, yeah, they can challenge you. They can say, how's the training going? Or, you know, how are you getting on in work, or whatever it might be. And that way you're getting more comfortable about talking about the process, because it's all about the process. If you do the process, the outcome will look after itself. So that'd be my kind of take on the accountability piece. And obviously it's evolved over the years for me. I still have those people now, and I kind of refer to them before as my kind of board of management. They're the people that I go to on a regular basis and have a coffee with and have a chat. And they see things in me that I don't see, and they challenge me on certain things. And that holds me to account. So for example, last year, I loved what I did last year in terms of the Olympics and the sport. I would love to do more of that. So how do I make that happen? Who are the people that can enable me to maybe get more opportunities in that? It's not going to happen with me sitting at home waiting for the phone going to ring. It's actually creating those opportunities and talking to people. And I suppose that's the networking piece. But throwing yourself out there and having a go is the best approach to it. And having some form of a plan and a bit of a structure can kind of empower you and motivate you to give it a lash, essentially. So Brian, I don't know if you want to come in on anything on that, you know.
There was one thing, David, it was a conversation myself and yourself was having, because I was saying like that I don't need accountability. I don't need to hold myself to account, or I don't need someone to hold me to account when it comes to cardio training. But if it comes to strength training, I needed a PT trainer. I didn't have the motivation to go to the gym and do strength training. I just didn't like it. That was a challenge. So I just want to say that to other people as well. Maybe you need accountability in some areas and not in other areas, or a different kind of accountability. And in diving into that, like you said something there, David, that I think is really important, like the fear of failure. That just stops so many people even starting the process. And to pull back to what other people what their goals and might be this year, like if you think of the three big pillars, your health, your wealth, and your relationships, they're the three big pillars. So maybe you want to create boundaries to stop certain people coming into your life that caused problems last year. Maybe you want to enhance your relationships. Maybe you want to save money. Maybe you want to eat better or start training. Think about it in terms of those three pillars: your health, your wealth, and your relationships, because that kind of covers everything. But one of the things that I want to say, and it touches on this idea of dealing with setbacks, because I think this is the key piece that touches on the fear of failure as well, because there's only so much we can actually control. We can't control the behaviors and attitudes and what other people say or do. And that is a big challenge. And that can sort of play a role in uh, your goals coming true as well. And it will definitely play a big role in setbacks that you may have as well. So I think in terms of dealing with setbacks, even that word failure, I think it's a really, really interesting word. And I think what's important is for people not to be afraid of failure. Like if you are setting goals for yourself and you're setting targets and you've thought about the process, I love that you covered that element of the process there because it's so important. But if you're setting these goals for yourself and they're new goals for some people, inevitably there's going to be failures along the way. But that's just a step on the ladder to success. Like it really, really is. You've got to fail to move forward. I've had so many failures in my life for everything that I've been successful at. So the fear of failure is sort of a misnomer in such that you're fearing something that's absolutely inevitable and must happen to in order to get success. So in terms of dealing with setbacks, there's a couple of ways that I like to think about this as well. And the first one is a concept that is really, really important to me. And it's not resilience. I call it beyond resilience, which for me personally means using adversity and setbacks as the fuel to learn and grow. That's what true resilience is. It's been flexible in the face of failure or whatever you want to call it. So there will be challenges on the way. And I said it already, already I've had setbacks this year. There was a personal health problem within the family as well, a bit of a big one as well. So that was a challenge that knocked off loads of things for myself. I've had injuries the last couple of months as well. So how do you use that? And in terms of beyond resilience, to use that as a way to deal as the fuel to learn and grow, I've been able to harness things like practicing self-compassion, practice acceptance. I think that's one of the most important things, practicing acceptance. Because if something happens, it already is the case. It has happened. What is. So anything else, like resisting it in your head or trying to change something that's already happened, it's absolute insanity when you think about it. So having acceptance around that, the failure or whatever you want to call it, having self-compassion for yourself as well. Don't beat yourself up and call yourself a failure. These are really, really important things. And I think the next thing then is jump back on the bike. Get back on it. That's really, really important. So don't wallow in self-pity. That's a dangerous place to be. So acceptance and self-compassion isn't wallowing in self-pity. It's accepting that you're stuck in the mud. How am I going to get out in the mud? This happened. What am I going to do about it? And in dealing with setbacks, that's something that I saw, those three pillars are something I practice: self-compassion, acceptance. What can I now do about it? So it's a huge topic, David. So I really love to hear your take on that, because I know you've had several in your own life, big ones in the public domain as well, obviously.
Yeah, look, and again, I think when you're honest and you're willing to share your own kind of journey, that's when, and in my experience, that's where I learned an awful lot from other people. Like I went to a talk in a corporate one time, and a guy got up, and I actually knew him. He had a background in sport, and he got up and he spoke about, dealing with retirement, forced retirement through injury, and he was extremely open about that transition and dealing with the change and his own kind of like personal identity and where was he now and what was he essentially going to do with the rest of his life. And I was kind of sitting in the audience thinking like, oh my God, like everything he spoke about resonated with me. And I think this is the important factor about these conversations and what we're doing today, is that hopefully there's something there that resonates with people. And inevitably, no matter how successful you are, you will have your ups and you will have your downs. And we always say, and we always go back to, like, success is never a straight line. And from the world of business to the world of arts to the world of sport, everybody has those little setbacks, and it's what you do in those moments, whether you rally within yourself or whether you ask for help and advice and you have that supportive network around you. I found in my experience that I like having people to support me. Some people can do it by themselves, and that's fine, that's brilliant. But for me, it's that reaching out piece. It's that kind of, putting your hand up, knocking on the door and asking for help and advice, be it in the world of sport or be it in the world of business. And I think, in those moments, you realize, okay, I can grow from this. And I think that's a huge word, that growth. And when do you grow? You grow when you're under pressure, when things change a little bit and you figure it out. And that kind of empowerment, that resilience comes to the fore. And I can remember, like, some of my biggest achievements in the world of sport came off the back of probably some of the biggest down days I've ever had. And it's taking stock about, okay, debriefing what worked, what didn't work, what can I do better, what do I want to do? And that's probably one of the hardest questions that, we can put to ourselves is, what is it that we want to do? What is it that we want to change? And I think the problem sometimes is we come into the new year now and the world takes off again. We're 14 days into the new year. A lot of people now are probably, I'm no different, back into, like, the kids going back to school. It's the busyness, the weekends, the sport is all on, and you almost just go back to default. And before you know it, it's kind of like, oh God, did I, where was that New Year's resolution, or where was that thing that I wanted to do for myself? It's now pushing into February. God, oh, you know what? It's gone. And I think that's the challenge that we have net right now, is actually understanding, okay, put a bit of value around it as we spoke, but you're going to have the days where it's not going to happen for whatever reason. And that's okay. That doesn't mean that it's all gone. You just have to start again. And it might happen again and you start again. And it's that phrase that Brian kind of referenced. It's getting back on the horse. It's absolutely getting back on the horse. And, I've struggled with injury myself over the last kind of like 6 months. I've had the flu over Christmas. I've been frustrated because I can't get out and do what I want to do. Like, I'd love to go for a run. It clears my head. I haven't been able to do that. But you know what? You just have to start again. And that's the simple thing. And I have people in that world that hold me to account. They'll give me a plan and they'll check in and go, how are you getting on? And then you're thinking, oh, I better go and do it. We live in a world where everything's monitored. They'll go on to Strava and they'll see whether I'm doing it or I'm not doing it. And that holds me to account. But I think inevitably you will have the days that it just, for whatever reason, life can just throw something in the way. But the reality is, it's what you do in those moments. And the most resilient people will rally within themselves, they'll ask for help and advice, but they don't give up and they start again, and they'll start again and again and again. And that's basically, the way I think, in a practical world where you're not going to have success as a straight line, you've just got to adapt with it. And again, Brian mentioned that word acceptance. You have to be nice to yourself. You have to allow yourself, a bit of breathing space. You have to accept that it's not going to be perfect. And even using that word, life is not perfect. And I think if you aim for excellence, whatever that might be for you, and that's the most important thing, it's not keeping up with your neighbors or friends or on social media. It's what works for you, and accepting that you're going to have the days that work and the days that don't work. That's okay. That's perfectly fine. And some of the most successful people that I have met, whether it's in sport or business, the amount of setbacks that they have had is phenomenal. And what you learn is that resilience is key. And resilience you can build over time. You're not born with a certain level of resilience. You learn through life. You think back to the times that we've all been challenged. What did you do in those moments? How did you get over that obstacle, that hurdle that was put in front of you? And I think that's the most important thing, because we're all very resilient. It's allowing yourself to remind yourself that, you know what, I am resilient. I can get through this. Whatever happens, you get back on the horse and you go again. And I think that's the most important thing that I have kind of come across, particularly in the last number of years with me anyway. Oh, mute.
Cheers, David. I love that element of it as well. It's the setbacks. I think it's I don't think we can say enough how important that acceptance piece is, because you are going to need it no matter what, because perfection doesn't exist. Like, that is a 100% fact. There is going to be setbacks. There's going to be loads of setbacks. So you've got to create a process or something around that. That's really, really key. Before we jump into the behavior change kind of piece and the habits piece, there's something else I want to just sort of circle back on as well. And it's something that I've kind of, I wouldn't say I struggle with, but it's something that doesn't seem very clear for me. And we mentioned it already. It's like, I wouldn't say tracking habits, it's tracking your behaviors, tracking your goals, tracking your priorities, tracking the changes that you want to make. And I have created a plan doc for myself for 2025 based on reviewing 2024. I'm not too sure if I mentioned this last time, but I have goals, but I also have a not to do list. So to do lists are great, but I have a not to do list, and basically, not to do list. It's like saying yes to too many things, spending time on my phone. I spent far too much time doing emails this year, so I'm after getting someone to manage me emails. But I have this urge to jump in and do it myself and micromanage all the time. So I'm saying no to that behavior as well. So what are the things that were holding you back from last year that you're going to do this year? But where I want to go with that is, if you get to the stage, or when you get to the stage of reviewing or setting your priorities, even if it's just 3 priorities for this year, so they just don't get lost in the ether, what are you going to do about that to check in on them? And what I do is I just set up a very simple thing in my calendar. I personally do it once a month at the end of every month, but you could do it on a quarterly basis. And just remind yourself to check in with your goals, to check in with what you'd set yourself for that day. And that's absolutely critical, because if you're not checking in on that, it's not going to get happen, because the reality is what gets measured gets managed. And if you're not measuring that, if you're not tracking that, it is not going to get managed. It is going to get lost in the ether. And that's just a big fact. And in terms of the habits and the behavior change, there's a million and one things we could talk about here. Um, as I said already, there's going to be a course that you can do. It's about 2 hours of content on that course, very specific content on that course, lots of little things in there. The one big thing that I want to talk about in terms of behavior change and habit change, just before I throw it over to David, is a lot of people, let's say you want to stop drinking wine during the week. You want to stop being on your phone too much. You want to create better boundaries and stop saying yes to everybody. And then you're a people pleaser and you have no time. Whatever it is for you, whatever the behavior is, we know what it is and we know how we do it generally. But the biggest challenge we have is we don't know why we do it. We can't get under the bonnet. And if it comes to any behavior that is repeated over time, what you're going to have is you're going to have 3 components of that. There's going to be a cue, there's going to be the behavior, and there's going to be the consequence, which is either reward or punishment. So if you feel bored, that's the cue. You pick up your phone. That's the behavior. The consequence is you're no longer bored. We are probably 3 hours on TikTok or Instagram, but you're no longer bored. That's a behavior that will stick over time. Again, if all of a sudden you're feeling a little bit stressed, that's the cue. You go to the fridge for chocolate or for a glass of wine. That's the behavior. The stress is relieved to a certain extent. That's the consequence. That's a habit or a behavior that will be sustained over time. So what I will say to anybody, and I know we're not talking about specific habits here, we're talking about multiple different things, but the most important thing to look at is the cue or the trigger. What is driving the behavior? Because if somebody here is, let's say, what we touched on already, let's say you planned great New Year's resolutions and all of a sudden you're not doing what you said you were going to do. Well, what was the cue to sort of forgetting about that or doing all of the other things? You haven't really created a process. You haven't set the tone for that. And you're busy doing all of the things you always do. And if you actually look at that, like, how was it going to change? It was a wish or a hope, as you put it so beautifully all the time, David. You were just wishing that it was going to change. But you're going to have to change the cue or the setting event that's going to change the actual behavior. So you're going to have to carve time out to eat healthier food, to go to the gym. You're going to have to create a process to say no to people if you're trying to create boundaries. You're going to have to put things in place. And this is when it comes to behavior change, is what is the setting event? What is the trigger? What is the cue that is going to drive the behavior that you actually want? And I think that's the most critical thing. It's what you do before the behavior that really matters.
Again, I'm nodding away, Brian, thinking like, God, yeah, I need to do this. I need to do this myself. This is like a kick of the backside that I needed. But as you're talking there, it it flows nicely into something that I kind of wanted to bring up, because you've hit all the nails on the head there, and like around that kind of self-empowerment piece as well. And I think, yes, your goals, and kind of accepting that there has to be a bit of a plan. There has to be something that entices you to follow that goal. And I think even you kind of touched on that when you know yourself. Okay, well, like, what is that trigger that, gets you to go over to the fridge and start eating, or gets you to pick up the bottle of wine, or whatever it might be, and I think that locus of control is very, very important, that internal or external. And I think we touched on kind of having that supportive network, okay, going to a gym and having somebody there that kind of motivates you, that's the external person, but the internal, that kind of question to yourself. And look, you have to be honest. You have to be honest with yourself. Like, if you want to change, the first port of call is looking within yourself and going, okay, well, and you described it really well. It could be a case of you come home, you've had a busy day, you're a little bit tired, and maybe you've got kids, you put the kids to bed, and you sit down for that like hour before you go to bed yourself. And, it's kind of, you're up here all day, and then suddenly you're down here and you're trying to get down here, but you've got that kind of the energy, and you want to do something. So I find myself, that's when I'd snack on like the unhealthy food. You'd go in, you're a little bit bored. Okay, I'll just start munching away on things, But again, that's the internal. So what can I do in those moments? Or else the phone comes out. And like myself and my wife, Charlotte, this is one of the things that we've really, and we're going to do it together. We're going to work on, like, when we're sitting down, we put the kids to bed, we're not going to go on the phones. You're not going to go up to bed and then get on the phone. And this is something, it's the unhealthy habit. And then your mind is kind of going crazy. That's not going to be conducive to good rest and recovery. So again, it's knowing yourself. It's kind of developing, okay, well, what are the skills needed? And I think sometimes, I'll be honest, I need her to do it for me to do it, and I think it's in tandem. It works together that way. But all of these things are very important. And I think it goes back to that behavior change. And one of the things that I've kind of used over probably the last, like, I'd say nearly decade by this stage, is like purpose, truth, and action. So like the purpose would be, okay, well, what is it that I want to do? And it could be anything. It could be, I refer to it, it could be like a promotion. It could be a holiday. I don't know. It could be going shopping. It could be, I want to go to the gym, whatever it might be. What is it that you want to do? And it doesn't have to be an array of things. It could be one or two things, but also what matters to you, what matters most to you. And then it's the truth. Okay, well, what's stopping me? Why can't I do it? What are the hurdles, the walls that I'm putting in place? And this is where you've got to be honest. And you have to, I find, getting the pen and paper out and actually just writing it down, getting it out of my head, putting it down in no real kind of order on a page, but I can then see it. What are the reasons? And it could be I doubt myself, I don't believe in myself, or I just don't have the time, or, when I'm bored or I'm stressed or I'm anxious, that's when maybe I overeat, whatever it might be. I think a truth element is really important. And then from that, you're building the actions. Okay, it's clear now. These are the things that are stopping me. Okay, I need to put some actions in place. A few things that I can try and adhere to. And again, the danger with that is keep it small. It doesn't have to be 10 things. Keep it small. It could be one thing. And I know, Brian, we kind of touch on motivation as well, but if you can do one thing and do that consistent and do it well, you know what? Then you can maybe go to two, and then eventually maybe three or whatever. But I think first and foremost is start small and celebrate and be proud of the fact that you're doing something that is a bit of a challenge, and that's where you grow. And I think that behavior change for me comes from that purpose, truth, and action. And it's something that I've really relied on over the last number of years to change the things that I do for not only just me now, but my family as well. And I think that's really important. So a bit of time out, the pen and paper, writing things down, getting it out of your head, and then trying to put a bit of structure around things that you can actually do on a day-to-day basis, which will help you achieve the things that you want to achieve for yourself, So I know, Brian, I know you kind of have things about behavior change as well, but just something that kind of resonated with me.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm like a nodding dog here, David, honestly. And I think something you said is probably the most important thing that we're probably going to say today is that baby steps. You've got to take baby steps because, and especially around New Year's, because people get these New Year's resolutions. There's no, I think we should all have notions, but it's dangerous when it comes to New Year's resolutions because you get notions of 10 kilometers, 20-minute meditation, kill the morning, all this kind of stuff. But you're going to get to Tuesday, never mind the 14th of January, and all of a sudden your motivation will be dead. If you take baby steps, as David said, and just that small thing can build into other things as well. I think that is the most important thing you've got to do, if you've got to create sustainable behavior change over time. It's really, really key. And I think just something you said, and I think it's one of the most important things that's been mentioned, is that knowing yourself. That is so important. But what I'd add is there being honest with yourself as well, because I had a really busy end of 2024, and I says, you know what, I'm going to start going to the gym in the evenings instead of the mornings. Now I know myself, I'm not going to go to the gym in the evenings. And if I was honest with myself, which I am now because I've changed it around for 2025, and that was just not going to happen. I don't like resistancy kind of things. I'm more of a morning person. I need to do the hard stuff in the morning. That's mental friction, that's physical friction, whatever it is. I've got to do that in the mornings. So I think knowing yourself and being honest with yourself and saying, look, I'm not going to go to the gym in the evenings because I'm going to be tired from work, making dinners, kids, activities, whatever it is. And maybe you're just not going to be able to get that in at this moment in time. And we're back to self-compassion. We're back to acceptance then as well. Maybe it's a walk at lunchtime. Like, what can you actually do? And don't put pressure on yourself. This is something that I can it's a double-edged sword, David. You often feel like you've got to put pressure on yourself to get it done, but if you put too much pressure on yourself, you'll push yourself over the edge. It's finely balanced.
It is, but I think I know we're talking about kind of motivation and accountability, but you hit on that word again, self-compassion, and I think sometimes, we try and do too much too soon. And again, with my background in the world of kind of running in particular, I meet an awful lot of people that want to run, and they want to kind of do 5Ks, they want to do half marathons, and the majority of people, they run too far, too fast, too soon, and it all just falls apart. They don't enjoy it. They find it too difficult. They get hurt, they get injured, and the motivation just all falls by the wayside. And like, even when I started doing a little bit more of the endurance side, I was falling into that mindset where it didn't feel like a training session unless I was literally crawling home, knackered, tired. And I had to change my whole mindset and actually go out and begin to enjoy it a little bit more. And I think that could be a walk, it could be a run, but even in any walk of life, what is those simple practical things that you can do? There's no point kind of going, do you know what, I'm going to change everything over the next 5 days. Like it's not possible. It's not possible. And I think you have to start small and celebrate the small wins and enjoy that process. Don't put too many time kind of restrictions on you where it has to be done by a certain date. You don't know what's going to happen. I think the fundamental thing, and I know you've kind of touched an awful lot on it, is about creating that healthy habit for yourself. What does that look like? And be content with that. If it's going out, in the evening time and maybe bringing the dog for a walk for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, isn't that fantastic? You've got 15 minutes out in the open, maybe it's podcast or making a phone call to someone that you love, whatever it is, that's worth an awful lot. And I think sometimes we get caught up and you got to change everything and you got to go from zero to hero in a very short space of time. Sustainable change is all about the process. It's accepting, it's giving yourself that self-compassion and enjoying the journey. And if you can enjoy the journey, the rest will look after itself, And I think you kind of touched on, like, again, that, and we said it in the last webinar, is that almost, I think I refer to it almost like a SWOT analysis of yourself. What are your strengths and weaknesses? Like you mentioned there, I can't go to the gym. It's in the evening time, it just doesn't work. That's perfectly fine. It might work for other people. It doesn't work for you. Perfectly fine. I'm very similar in that. I like to get my run out in the morning. I find when I think about, I'll give myself an hour to go for a run. If I don't do it in the morning, then something else comes into that world. It's work, it's the kids, it's school runs, it's, helping out at home. The kids could have activities in the evening. Suddenly I'll do it tomorrow. Then I feel guilty about myself. So you have to kind of look at your own day and go, on a practical level, if I don't get an hour in, I can get 30 minutes. You know what? That'll do me for today. That's okay. So.
Yeah, I love that. And I know I think we're going to have a little bit of a Q&A as well. So if anyone has any questions, pop them in the chat there, or even better, jump on, put your hand up and jump on and talk. But the last one thing I want to mention as well. So I did mention this, it's like this ABC of behavior change. The A actually stands for antecedent, which is just a technical term for the cue or the trigger. The B is the behavior and the C is the consequence. But one of the things that's really important is it's very hard to change the cue or the trigger if that's stress or anxiety. How do you change that without doing a lot of work in yourself? So one of the best things I've recognized is the golden rule of habit change. So let's say you're going to be stressed from work and there's not much you can do about that right now. Well, what's the behavior? A glass of wine, go to the fridge, junk food. Well, use that cue to replace the bad behavior with a good behavior. And David just said it, go walk the dog, go for a walk yourself, call a friend. journal, meditate, breath work, spend time with the kids, be present with your puppy, whatever it is for you. Change the behavior based on the actual cue. And I tell you what, a lot of that stuff can have the same effect, but you won't be lost on TikTok or Instagram for 3 hours or binging on Netflix or into your second bottle of wine on a Tuesday. Hopefully that's not the case, but this is where it is. Like the reality is, addiction is a challenge for many people out there. So I don't know if you've anything else to throw in before we finish up for the Q&A, David.
And just even on that, like, I remember years ago reading the book, The Chin Paradox by Dr. Steve Peters.
Great book.
He would have done an awful lot of work with, like, business people, sports people at high levels and things like that. And one thing that really resonated with me is exactly what you kind of touched on there, is that cue. So that internal dialogue, how you talk to yourself. And again, I kind of, that awareness of actually understanding what was driving me to yeah, like I went through binge eating and stuff like that. So again, what was driving me into that space was that stress, that anxiety, that nervousness, not being good enough. But it was all that internal dialogue, how I was talking to myself. And look, it took a lot of time, but the technique that he kind of referred to, and then something else that I've kind of come across from a cognitive behavioral therapy point of view, was the 3D technique. So again, when you're in that moment and the voice is kind of telling you, oh, I'll do this and I'll do that. The first D was distraction. So you do something just to break that cycle of thought. It could be music, it could be starting a conversation with someone, it could be getting up off the couch and, I don't know, going for a walk, whatever it might be. It just breaks that cycle. The second D was distance. So I'm distancing myself from the voice inside my head. Because if it's David, I'll let David go on and on and on and on. So the way he kind of talked about it was the little chimp. So rename that voice inside your head. So it's not David, it's some other person that I've named. And then the third D was dispute, because a lot of these irrational thoughts, the things that were driving my behaviors and my mood, like they were things that were never going to happen. They were things that were just, I was stewing on. So then the third D was dispute. I'd actually kind of counter the argument in my head. So, there was lots going on in here, but that was a technique that I've used and I still use to this day. And it kind of goes back to yourself in terms of, as you were mentioning, that cue. What is that thing that drives me? If you can catch it, become a little bit more aware of it, then we can deal with it a little bit better. So if anyone's interested, The Chin Paradox, Dr. Steve Peters, yeah, it's a good book.
Yeah,
Super book. Super book. I'll just open it up to the floor, really. There's a Q&A box there, and if you have any questions, please do post them in. We do want this to be, an interactive discussion. I'm sure that there are plenty of questions out there. I might just kick us off with, there's something that you said earlier, Brian, about using adversity and setbacks as the fuel to learn and grow. And that really, I think is so important. But how do you balance that with controlling the controllables? Because I think a lot of the time, when any of us go through adversity, we tend to blame things outside of our control, whether that's, a decision made by a coach or a manager or environmental circumstances that are without of our control. So then we maybe miss the opportunity to use that as fuel to learn and grow. So how would you approach that situation? I think it's something that probably every single person on this call has gone through at some point or another.
Yeah, big time. And I think they really go hand in hand as well, Yvonne. So I'll give you an example of this, right? And it's around difficult relationships and difficult challenges that we have with people, let's say, or just somebody being a bit of a dick, like, a boss that's probably struggling with their own stuff. And all of a sudden they're just not very nice or whatever way that is. So how do you deal with that adversity? And an example from my own life, I love my dad to bits, but he's a very negatively minded person. He's getting better, but he loves talking about negative politics. And I really struggled. Like, I think when it's your parents and you get pulled in really easily. So that was the adversity I was facing. And one answer to that would be spend less time and I get less triggered. But I didn't want to do that because it was my dad. So I says, how can I go about helping myself to have this relationship without getting triggered all the time? And it was using the adversity as the fuel for growth. So what I've done on the back of that, I practice empathy. I practice my perspective taking skills. I practice non-reactivity, really core skills, because my dad had his own challenges. That's the why he had a negative mindset. So practicing empathy, stepping into his shoes, practicing presence and non-reactivity from myself, practicing compassion from my dad. So basically you're practicing these skills that are helping you to learn and grow. So you're using that challenge. And let's say it's a challenge with somebody in the workplace that's just toxic and you don't want to be around them. They're not going to serve you. Well, the tactic you could practice is right in creating a boundary. I'm not going to have this person in my space and polluting that element of my life and taking my energy. So the practice is creating boundaries, boundary setting. So there's just some examples, and I think this really works really nicely when it comes to challenging relationships with other people. And this you can control. You can control practicing non-reactivity, practicing empathy, but you can never control the other people. So that's where that link is there.
Yeah, I think that's a really useful thing to keep in mind, because we do sometimes forget that we control how we react. We can't ever control other people's behaviors. But there's a question after coming in here from Jacqueline. Said our individual journeys on this level definitely help us in home and work life, but more so in work. If we can turn up to work ourselves, it's easier not to drag them home. Dealing with things daily also is important. One of my team said they arrive to work and park their car, leaving all of their stuff there until the work shift finishes. They practice that boundary, helped me a lot. And it's just a great talk, guys.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point actually. And again, it's that boundary. Like, I've heard stories of people, the way they might approach it is they could be driving home from work, and that's where they kind of dial down the day. And even when they're driving to work, it's when they dial it up. You go to work, you come back, you drive into your driveway or wherever you park your car, perhaps, or that walk home. And even in certain cases, they might kind of write things down in the notes in the phone just to get that part of the day kind of done. The line is in the sand. You're home now. That's your time, and whatever that might look like with kids, or whatever it might be. There is a boundary, and I think it's a nice way. As Jacqueline's kind of put it there, like you leave all your stuff in your car, you exit that. That's that kind of life for the day. You move into the next phase, and that's something that's very practical as well. Like whether it's a walk or whether it's the drive home, whatever your commute might be, it's actually using that as a beneficial time where you dial it down or you dial it up, whatever that might be for you. It's a nice way of putting it.
Yeah, I think it's always good to compartmentalize things. Sometimes it makes it easier for, as you were saying earlier in the talk, David, about taking small steps and doing small things at a time.
Yeah,
I do
exactly.
I have loads of questions.
Go on, then,
Unless anyone
one.
else wants to come in with the Q&A. I'd one around the cues, I suppose. Well, I might go to you first, Brian. I know that you had said that on your not to do list is being on your phone, and I think that that's something that nowadays is probably something on everybody's not to do list, is being on their phone so much. But I'd like to know what are you replacing that behavior with? And then Brian or David, I'll come to you in a second. I'll give you a chance to think about what types of things would you have on your not to do list for the year.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, funnily enough, I think the phone is an interesting one, because I think the phone is just stealing from our lives. I don't think it needs to be replaced. I think the replacement is already there. It's spending time with your family. It's your own mind, your focus, your attention. Like, it's just robbing your attention and your focus. And I felt a little bit a slave to my phone. I remember just being in my car and having this urge to pick up my phone. There was nothing on the phone I wanted to check. There was nothing I was really that interested in, but this craving and urge to pick up the phone was there. So it was just sort of enslaving my mind. One thing that is really simple and really powerful and works really well when it comes to the phone is making it black and white. God, a phone, like, you won't want to go on Instagram if your phone is black and white. It's the most boring thing in the world. And that is a really powerful tool for that. I actually have, like, I haven't got my keys on me, but I actually bought this little tool. This is how powerful phones could be, because I consider myself to have good mental health and good boundaries and good tactics around this. But I had to buy this little tile. It's called Unplug with a Q, UNPLUQ. And what it does is it locks me out of my phone. And then the only way I can get access to my phone is if I scan in this tile on the back of my phone. Now, you could think just put your phone in a different room, but you'll end up just grabbing your phone and it makes its way back in. But what this does is this little tile, it stops you from mindlessly grabbing the phone, because all of a sudden you're in awareness and saying, oh God, right, I'm knowingly making this decision to enter into this phone. So I lock myself out of my phone from 5:30 in the morning. So when I wake up, I can't get into it until about 11 o'clock. And if you really need it for something urgent, yeah, and it's only certain apps, you can lock it out of certain apps. You can still use it to make phone calls and stuff. And then in the evening from 6:30 to 9:30, because that's family time, that's when I should be with the family, not being on my phone. So that's one of the most powerful things. And it just gives you back your life. And with the phone, like what you could do is as well, and I did do this at one time, specific to your question, Yvonne. I had this urge to pick up my phone in the car, and I replaced that with one deep breath. So when I felt the urge, instead I'd do a deep breath. But what I find is I'd grab the phone and forget about it. So I ended up putting my phone on the ground on the passenger seat. So I'd get the urge to grab the phone, realize, oh, it's on the ground because I'm not supposed to be using it, and that was the new cue to take the deep breath. So I was replacing inattention and a lack of focus with more attention and focus.
Mm.
That's
Yeah.
some really good ones. Yeah, really good ones. Lorcan had a question here as well for you both, and or in how do you have any recommendations if you fall off the wagon along the way, and is there a good process or sort of best practice, I suppose, for resetting and getting back into good habits again?
Yeah, like I think there's a few things on that. I think the initial one would be self-compassion. That's okay. It's don't beat yourself up about it. And just start again. And I think, what does that look like? Because sometimes I think, let's say from a sporting context, it can be helpful whether you're in a group or a club, or you go to a class, is a nice way. Whereas when you're doing stuff by yourself, it can be a little bit harder. So again, it comes back to you as an individual. What way does it work? If you fall off the wagon, your health and fitness, you kind of think you beat yourself up. Start again, get yourself back into that class. Just show up. Just show up. And that can be the hardest part, is leaving the house and putting the shoes on or the runners on and getting yourself to that location. But I think it's not doom and gloom. I think you will have days when you're tired, you're fatigued. It's just you don't feel up for it. We all have them. That's okay. Don't beat yourself up about it, but just refresh and start again. And I think it's just a case of making yourself aware that this is normal procedure. And the hardest part is just, okay, let's go again. So I think, yeah, that's my approach to it, Brian.
Yeah, do you know what? I think we'd be remiss to not mention James Clear's brilliant book, Atomic Habits. Like, if you really want
Yeah,
to
yeah.
make changes with your habits, like his book, he has taken the scientific ideals and theories from behavior change and really put them into a palatable book that's just great to read. And I got this from his book, and I didn't notice beforehand that the biggest predictor of successful behavior change is jumping straight back in. Like I said, David, so if you miss Monday and Tuesday because of something, if you get sick, jump back in on Wednesday. Don't wait until the following week. Jump straight back in, because there will people that get sick. There'll be holidays. There's always bumps in the road somewhere. So as soon as you can, jump straight back in.
Excellent. We have a question here as well from Justine. So she said, the tools you've mentioned are really good, especially the ABC model and the purpose, truth, and action. But I suppose when emotions are heightened and a person is emotionally charged, what would you recommend to do to maintain the focus and act based on the mind and not emotions?
Do you want to go there?
Well, I think one of the things that I kind of refer to in terms of self-empowerment was taking charge of your emotions and being a little bit more aware. And look, we've all been in those kind of mindsets where your emotions run wild, and in particular, kind of dealing with change. In my circumstances, emotions were just like that, gone, and then everything would descend into chaos. Um, I'll be honest, for me personally, I needed external help. I needed to talk to someone about this in terms of kind of managing, everything that kind of really threw at me. And that was the way that now, where I'm at now, it's about managing that and spotting the little triggers. So I can, like, I'm so aware of this. Like, if I don't do certain things, I'm heightened. Emotions begin, the voice can come into the head, and it just runs wild. So I can spot the little triggers. So simple, practical things like, if I'm not getting enough rest, and that was one of the things, going back to Vaughn, your question, like, what do I want to do this year? I found myself in a space kind of like October, November, December, I've been really busy. And a lot of the work that I was doing was very intense. It was, engaging with people, with an audience. Suddenly, I'm up here the whole time, and then you got to do it again. It emotionally just took a lot of energy out of me. So, managing that, and as a result, going back to my emotions, I wasn't doing the things that were my outlets. Going for the run, bringing Oscar across the green to kick football with, simple practical things that I actually didn't know was not only good for me, but was good for my family as well. And those are the things that I kind of quickly spotted that, you know what, these are little triggers. I need to have an element of these in my life that helps me manage my own emotions. And if I can do that, well, then there's a little bit more clarity. And again, look, it's very individual, but from my kind of experience, those are the things that I quickly kind of learned. And, you know, even talking to someone on a regular basis in terms of like professional support, I learned an awful lot about that little toolbox, those little things that I could do to manage myself. So sleep, rest, recovery, trying to lead a healthy life. As Brian kind of touched on earlier on, saying no as well was quite hard. You know, I work for myself. It's very easy to be a nodding dog and think of the money, like, you know. But in reality, you got to have that balance, and that all created and has created and enabled me to better manage my my emotions going forward.
Yeah, everything you said there, David. It's all that preemptive work, because I think as soon as you become emotionally reactive, you've nearly lost the battle. It's very difficult to pull back from that. So I think the goal is to do the work preemptively, like everything you just said there, before the emotions come into play. So ask yourself, why are you becoming emotional, and then trying to do the work to stop it coming into play. But then again, sometimes it just happens. Life happens. So we're back to self-compassion. We're back to self-acceptance to start again another time.
I think it probably links in a little bit with the example you gave earlier about you know, your relationship with your dad, Brian, as well, and how, you know, you having empathy as well and trying to put yourself in the
Yeah.
other person's shoes is probably a good way too of being able to, I suppose, take the emotions out of it a little bit if you focus less on yourself and try focus on the other
Yeah,
person. Is there
definitely.
any other questions from the group before we wrap up? Yeah, well, if there's no other questions, I just want to wrap the session up by thanking both of you again for, you know, a really, really in-depth, knowledgeable, informed conversation this morning. I think the insights that both of you shared have been really, really useful for every single person on the call. I think everyone's going to take something out of it, which is brilliant. And we will share the resources with everyone afterwards. As Brian mentioned earlier, he does have access, which he's willing to give free access to a training course that he has also developed. So I will share the link to that. I'll share the documents shared in the previous session as well, which were around, you know, doing a mindful reflection. So I will share those documents, and I'll share both recordings again. But just to thank you very much, Brian, and thanks a million as well to you, David.
No, thank you, Yvonne, and thanks for everyone logging on. And Brian's he's too nice to do this, but Brian also has a book bonus time, which is very, very good. So as we're throwing books into the mix, put that on your bedside table, and no doubt you'll gain a lot from it.
Thanks, David. Appreciate that. Thanks, Yvonne. Thanks, Mary. And you guys as well. It was great. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks a million, everyone.
Cheers, folks. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
All the best.